Chapter 1. I Can't Be Mated to an Omega. Mara's POV. Many people do not treasure what they have until they lose it, and it's very sad because I do not remember my past well. All I could remember is my name. And since I was young, I was called by it. Mara was what most of my family and my friends called me, when in full it was Marikai. I can't complain about my looks. The moon goddess blessed me with long blonde hair, which many thought of as pretty, but I didn't like it because many people hated me before they even got to know me well. Blondes are hot, and at times bitchy. That's what others believed in. But to me, it was just a pure lie. Well, maybe. I was slender, with a fair figure, medium breasts, and a little waist. The rarest of them all were my eyes. They were ocean blue with a bit of red blended in them. Every time I meet strangers, they look at me with admiration, while others with hate and disgust. I really never knew why. I was born a beta werewolf. Although both my parents were werewolves, the ones that adopted me at the age of 7 were human. It was sad that I couldn't remember anything before the adoption. I didn't know my real mother or father. The only family I knew were my adoptive parents and my only little brother, Ken. Ken was 17 years old, but he looked a bit older than his age. He was good-looking and well-built. Plus, he was a soccer team captain. He attracted more girls than honey attracted bees on a tree. Sadly, he didn't like them, although he couldn't stop flirting with them. Ken had different girls for fun. Each day, he changed them like shirts. Mom, Dad, and Ken knew I was a werewolf because 60% of my school were werewolves. 20% vampires, 10% humans, and the other 10% were other supernaturals such as witches, pixies, shifters, etc. School was really fun, and sucked at the same time. I walked in my school corridor with a deep sigh because I hated it. I cursed inwardly when I spotted Stacy near her locker. Stacy and I were part of the cheerleader squad. Stacy was known as the princess of our school. She was tall, slim, hot body, blonde hair, and very beautiful with gray eyes. Many compared us to each other, and it really sucked because we were different in behavior. Stacy was a huge flirt, and many guys tried to fuck her, although she had a freaking mate. She also had a bad attitude towards nerds and poor people. She usually picked on the weak, and so did I. I did that to blend in with the cool students, and since I was pretty and had a good background, I qualified as one of the coolest students, just like Ken and Stacy did. "Mara!" Stacy called as she approached me. I stood still and waited for her. When she reached, she smiled and hugged me tightly. I pulled back, annoyed, while faking a smile. "Hey, are you excited?" She asked me happily as I looked at her a little confused. "Excited for what?" I asked, not knowing what she meant. "Are you for real? Today's your 18th birthday, and being the beta that you are, the party will be amazing, awesome, big, and breathtaking. Too bad it won't be at the pack house," she said loudly. Fuck it. I knew Ken would never shut his mouth when it came to her. He really had a thing for her. Unfortunately, she was taken. It was supposed to be a secret that only family knew of. The pack I had joined when I was 8 wasn't as welcoming as I thought it would be. The alpha was an old, grumpy man who was rumored to have had a son who left in anger after the Luna had died. It was sad. But what still surprised me was how he wasn't going rogue or dying. When a mated werewolf loses his or her mate and love of their life, their wolf dies too, because of the pain and emptiness they feel. Later, the person also dies. To me, it was still a mystery how he kept on living. Maybe that was why he was grumpy. Our alpha hated noise, pretty things and celebrations. I only went to the pack when there were meetings and new rules or tasks to be taken. Apart from that, I had nothing to do with the pack. "So, Mara, are you excited?" Stacy asked again. "Well, not really," I answered, honestly. "Why? Today is the day that you will finally be able to know and tell who your mate is. I bet it's Rain," she said with a giggle as my wolf growled angrily. Many people and pack members wanted me to date Rain, which was so fucking impossible. Rain was a werewolf, but he had a very bad reputation. Rain was called a virgin hunter by many popular guys and girls. He only dated and slept with virgins. He usually said it made him feel happy and powerful. I found his behavior so sickening. I, too, was a virgin, although no one knew because I kept it a secret. If they were to find out, I would be turned into a laughing stock. I hated sleeping around, and I was keeping myself for me, not my mate. "Our body is being kept for our mate." Abby, my wolf, growled at me. Abby was my wolf. She rarely talked to me because I was once very angry with her. She was basically forcing me to remember a past I no longer wanted to remember. I snapped and called her an animal, which was ruining my life. I even went as far as to threaten her. I told her I would reject our mate if she continued to force me. She was so angry with me and went quiet, giving me the silent torture. But now, I was surprised that she was talking to me. "Look, Stacy, Rain is cool, but..." I cut my sentence short when I picked up a very breathtaking scent. Nature mixed with fresh flowers. I turned and looked at the door where the scent was coming from, impatiently. When Peter walked in, I couldn't believe my eyes. I was in shock. "Mate," Abby whispered. No, and no. Peter was an Omega. Our pack's Omega, nerd, faggot, and low class who was hated and bullied by most of the popular kids. I too bullied him, although deep down in my heart, I never wanted to. Peter was far from handsome or hot. He was taller than me. He stood at 6'3". He wore baggy, annoying clothes, and his black hair bangs covered most of his face. No one really knew what he really looked like, not even the teachers. I looked at his hands and neck and saw light bruises on them. He looked a bit pale. "Mate, mate, mate!" Abby couldn't stop howling, happily. Peter stopped walking a few meters away from me. He slowly lifted his gaze that was fixed on the floor and looked at me. "Oh, fuck," I whispered, knowing I could only curse. My heart was beating wildly as Abby tried to take over. She wanted to go and embrace our mate right there. My breath was becoming labored as I tried to calm myself. "Mara, what's wrong?" Stacy asked, worriedly. She gasped loudly, then pointed a finger at me. The only time Stacy gasped like this was when my eyes had turned. Hearing her gasp made me realize that my eyes must have turned into pure gold. She looked ahead and noticed Peter looking at us. "Move! Get lost, fucking Omega!" she yelled at him. I looked at Stacy in anger. Abby wanted her dead for yelling at our mate. Peter looked down, then turned and went back outside. "Mara, are you okay?" she asked again as I nodded while I calmed myself down. "Well then, let's go to class. We have English for our first period," she said as I faked a smile. Stacy, about the party. I don't think I will make it, I said, seriously. Why won't you? Ken wanted to surprise you. He invited everyone at the school, she answered. I was about to answer when I picked up my mate's scent mixed with fresh blood. I quickly ran outside in fear and saw Peter leaping towards the woods that were close to our school, with blood dripping from his right hand. Abby tried to forcefully take control. I pulled her back and moved towards Peter. Peter turned and saw me, then quickly moved faster as I followed. When I stepped in the woods area, he was nowhere to be seen or heard. Chapter 2. Omega to Alpha. Mara's POV. I lay on my bed at night, ignoring all knocks that came on my door. I had met my mate, but I was so slow to act and very stupid to let him go alone. I was worried about him because he was injured. Mara, come on! The party won't start without you. Today's your birthday. You need to attend, please, Ken said as I ignored him. I heard a loud howl from afar that made my heart ache. Mate, now, Abby whimpered loudly. I felt fear and panic hit me hard. I was so scared. That howl came from Peter. I could feel it. Something was wrong with my mate. I quickly stood up and opened the door, then ran downstairs, ignoring the calls and shouts of my name. I ran outside and into the woods, not caring that my feet were bare. My heart and my mind were telling me that he needed me right now. I picked up his scent as I ran. I followed it, hoping I could find him soon. Everything was bad, and it was really late. I knew if midnight was to strike, I was going to turn into my wolf for the very first time. I heard from Stacy how painful it was. She usually told me how I needed my family or mate around when I was about to turn, but right now, all I could think of was finding Peter. After running for an hour or so, I stood under a tree to catch a breath. Abby, why can't we find him? We've been searching and running in circles for more than an hour. I'm really tired. Let's give up for today, I said to her, silently. I kept quiet and waited for a response. When a few minutes went by in silence, I decided to go back. I was about to turn when a sharp pain pierced my stomach. I quickly touched the tree as my breath picked up. Abby, I called in fear. I felt another wave of pain hit me harder. I fell on my knees in pants. Shit, I whispered. When it hit again, I screamed out with forming tears, then lay down. I was scared. I tried to crawl back, but failed. I could feel myself become weaker. I was about to mind-link Stacy when it hit me harder than the previous one. I could hear and feel my bones begin to crack and rearrange themselves. I cried out with each wave of pain that I felt. I sobbed lowly as I tried to move. I felt hands pull me from the ground. From the sweet scent I picked up and the calming sparks I felt all over my body, I knew it was Peter. He pulled me on his lap and embraced me. I breathed heavily as the pain lessened. Don't fight it, even if it hurts. His soothing voice whispered in my ear for the very first time. I held his shirt in my clenches as I calmed my breathing. It hurts, I whispered. I know, he answered while he kissed my head. I stayed still in his arms for some hours, feeling relaxed and comfortable. I tightened my grip on his shirt when the wave of pain came back, worse than before. I sobbed loudly as Peter rubbed my back gently. The sparks made it better, but the pain was still there. I closed my eyes when I felt my body become lighter. Peter let me go as the pain slowly vanished. I whimpered at the loss of my mate's closeness. "You are very beautiful," he whispered as I quickly stood up and looked at my legs. I really was on fours. My fur was a pretty white coat with black spots. "Listen, I know very well that you're my mate, but I'm sorry. I can't be with you," he said, seriously. I was filled with a lot of different emotions, mostly fear. Abby was whimpering over and over, fearing his words too. "Abby, is he rejecting us?" I asked, sadly. Abby was whimpering. I too felt very scared. I couldn't stop the whimper that went past my lips. He really was rejecting us. "I'm not rejecting you, Mara. I had known that you were my mate since 2 years ago. I felt the pull and decided to wait for you to turn 18 and feel it too now. I'm glad that you can feel it, but I don't want you with me," he said, as I felt a sharp pain pierce my heart. I thought of myself as human and shifted back to my human form. Tears were forming in my eyes. "Peter, I'm sorry. I was such a jerk to you at school. I bullied you, insulted you, and made you a laughingstock. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please, don't reject us. We will die without you. I don't care if you're an Omega. I want you with me as my mate," I cried as he sighed. "Mara," he called while I looked at him. He turned when he heard some twig and dry leaves snap. "Mara, get behind me," he said while looking ahead. "Peter, I'm sorry," I pleaded. "Mara, get behind me," he commanded loudly. I was shocked at how much power his command had. Abby whimpered in submission, making me bare my neck to him. I found myself complying to his command in a quick second. I stood behind him with 1,000 questions going through my mind. The only one who could make me submit so easily was my alpha. With the beta blood in me, Peter was in no position to command me. Why then did his command make me submit? Was it because he was my mate? 2 rogues appeared from the trees with low growls. "Peter, you're an Omega. Run. I will cover for you," I said as I shifted into my wolf. They charged at us. I jumped in front of Peter to protect him, even though I lacked in training. One rogue jumped on me and pinned me down as I struggled to get up. I felt sharp teeth sink into my shoulder. I loudly whimpered in pain. "Mara!" Peter screamed as he transformed into his big brown wolf. The rogue quickly removed its teeth in my shoulders and slowly took a few steps backward as Peter's wolf moved forward. I could feel the strong alpha aura being emitted from him. I lay my head down, baring my neck to him in submission. His wolf angrily charged at the rogues, tearing them into pieces. After making sure that all the rogues were dead, he turned and moved closer to me. Abby and I knew too well not to anger our alpha mate, so we kept baring our neck to him. He pushed my head slightly with his nose, then licked my fur coat slowly. I lifted my head from the ground and looked at my mate in admiration. My mate's wolf was bigger than mine and looked stronger. I felt pride swell in me just by looking at him. I couldn't believe I was mated to an alpha, who everyone thought was an Omega.
Chapter 3. Bullied. Peter's POV. It's funny how today of all days, my wolf was so restless. When I was about to walk into the school corridor, I picked up a beautiful rose and strawberry scent. I knew that she was near me. I found out 2 years ago that Mara Williams was my mate. Then, I was very happy and so excited. I thanked the moon goddess for giving me such a beautiful mate. Mara was the most beautiful lady I had ever set my eyes on. The day I first met her was the day I had enrolled in school, and as if luck was on my side, the same day was my birthday. When I approached her, she looked at me with a smile so bright and warm. Then she called her friends to come over. When they did, I stood in shock with the next words that came out of her mouth. "Faggot gay guy!" She went on to insult me loudly for everyone to hear. I couldn't believe that my own mate would do that, and what was worse, she could not feel the pull. How could she hurt me like that? I was so angry that I turned and went away in sadness and tears. I didn't want to cry, but it hurt like a bitch seeing my one true destined mate treating me like trash. My wolf was hurt too, and got quiet for a while. When knocking off, I was feeling exhausted and angry with everyone. As I walked outside, I paid no attention to my surrounding. I ended up bumping into Ken and his friends, the so-called bullies of our school. I tried to apologize when a punch landed on my face. I fell weakly to the ground. I had no will to fight them, and my wolf was silent on me. I was hit by Ken and his group badly and injured. After they were satisfied with my bruises, they left me laying down on the ground weakly. I knew very well why they had hit me. Many werewolf schools were like that. If you were a new student, you were supposed to have a good background and status to join the rich kid squad. But I made sure that my background and status were kept hidden. From the way I dressed and isolated myself, many thought of me as an Omega, when I was actually an Alpha. My father was the Alpha of the pack. He was also known as the Grumpy Alpha. Years back, he told everyone that he had a son who had died, just because he never liked me and my mother. He hated that I was a weak child and very fragile. He blamed my mother because she too was a weak Omega wolf. Instead of loving us, he rejected us. Later, my mother died of a heartbreak, leaving me behind. By then, I was only 10 years old. After my mother's funeral, which was a secret funeral, I wanted to run away, but Father wouldn't let me. After all, I was his one and only son. I was the Alpha that was supposed to take over his pack after him. He sent me abroad to stay there and study. He told me I was only allowed to return a week before my 18th birthday. I went and stayed abroad with no questions. There, I isolated myself from everyone, and I was labeled a delinquent because I beat up the bullies that bullied me mercilessly. Many students began to fear and ignore me. As time went on, I had no friends until I returned back. After returning, I refused to see my father or step foot in the pack house. At first, my father understood, then later went crazy on pursuing me to return to the pack. I later found out that every once a year, there was a witch that came to cast a spell on him so he could become sane. His wolf was losing it without having a mate beside them. I knew very well that my father regretted his past actions and for rejecting us, but he made a choice. For that, I hated him. I blamed him mostly for my mother's death. My father usually begged me to come back and take my rightful place as Alpha, and I always turned him down and ignored him. When I was abroad, I trained very hard so I could be strong. While I was training, I kept 3 things in mind. 1. Always be strong and never show weakness. 2. Mates were a waste of time and life. And 3. Shifting without a mate by your side was as painful as a knife piercing your body. Every day I watched Mara from afar. Even though she had hurt me, she was still mine. My wolf needed her. He needed his mate's closure. I later found out that she was only 16 years old. That explained why she couldn't feel the mate pull. I decided to wait for her 18th birthday, while hoping in my heart she would one day accept me. After 2 years of waiting patiently for her while being bullied by her and her friends, I heard from someone how they were looking forward to her 18th birthday. I was so happy that the day I had hopefully waited for was finally arriving. I really wanted to see her, so I stupidly went to school and walked in the corridors with the bruises which were inflicted on me by Ken and his friends. I heard her talking to her annoying friend Stacy. Then suddenly, she stopped. I lifted my gaze from the ground and I looked at her. I was expecting her to call me names, but this time, she was quiet. The way she looked at me was how a shocked werewolf who had just discovered her mate would look like. Her eyes turned to a beautiful golden yellow. I could tell I had an effect on her. She tried to breathe calmly, but it seemed not to work on her. "Let's go to her. She now knows that we're her mate," Derek, my wolf, said happily. I smiled under my bangs, knowing that we could finally be with her as we wanted. Derek had almost lost it months ago when she couldn't feel the pull. He had always wanted to be closer to her or mark her. I was about to move when Stacy yelled, "Move! Get lost, frickin' Omega!" For a second, Mara looked at Stacy with a murderous look. I knew her friend would stand in my way. I slowly turned and went outside. "No, go back! I want our mate!" Derek whimpered as I walked away sadly. From nowhere, I was surrounded by Ken's friends. This time, one of them had a knife in his hands. They hit me while I let them. One of them was about to stab me when I held the knife in my hand. Derek was angry. He wanted to come out, but I pushed him back, knowing if he did, he could rip them all to pieces. After a few minutes, the men left me alone with laughter as I stood up with bruises and an injured hand. I walked towards the woods that were near the school. Then, I picked up my mate's scent. I quickly turned around and found her behind me. She looked worried and sad. I didn't want her to see me weak, so I quickly picked up my pace and got into the woods, then shifted into my wolf. "Mate! Mate!" Derek whimpered. "No, Derek. She's one of the bullies who hurt us every day," I said as I moved further into the woods. "She didn't know that we were her mate then, but now she does. She will love and accept us, I know," he growled, as I started running and ignoring his angry growls.